You're watching HFO-TV.
Welcome back to HFO-TV. This is Greg Frick, a partner at HFO. We're here on location at the World Forestry Center, doing a little interview here prior to our investor roundtable event, which you'll also be able to see online here. Today we're going to talk to Dr. Gerard Mildner, Academic Director of the Center of Real Estate for Portland State University. Thank you for coming.
My pleasure.
And we want to talk a little bit, we've talked a lot, I know we've had on HFO-TV some people from Metro, City of Portland, talking about the urban kind of draft report and the comprehensive change. And I know you did a density at any cost report back in November. I want to kind of get your take on what's going on in the municipalities, from Metro to the cities, and the whole thought of this, the urban growth boundary, which has been around since the 1970s in Portland, the Portland metro area, and kind of the changes in what people are doing, and maybe some things that people have not really talked about or it really hasn't been out in the public side, so we can kind of jump right in there. So thanks again for coming. Maybe give a little background on you, and so the audience knows, and again we'll jump right in there.
So I've been at Portland State for 20 years. I've taught for a number of years in our School of Urban Studies and Planning. I'm now a professor in the School of Business Administration, and I'm the Academic Director at the Center for Real Estate. We have a master's degree in real estate development that I manage. I got interested in the urban growth report during the fall. I'd done some previous work back in the mid-90s during one of the urban growth boundary decisions back then. Metro makes a decision about whether the urban growth boundary has 20 years worth of land supply, and they make that decision every 4 or 5 years.
Right.
And so this is kind of a seasonal thing in some ways. And so during the year 2015, the Metro Council will be debating and ultimately making a decision about whether to expand the boundary and how much. And the presentations that I was hearing made me very nervous because they didn't really talk very much about what the impact would be on the housing market. And in doing some research, I could see that their models were projecting pretty substantial rent increases and housing price increases over the next 20 years as a result of their current plans.
So what did you think was the focus more, because we've heard it I think the last 4 or 5 times we've heard them talk about the urban growth boundary and putting new land in. It always seems to be the focus on industrial land, office land. The residential kind of gets pushed, not pushed to the side, but it's, hey, that'll come with it, but we need to go on this. Is that kind of the take you were seeing too?
I think that's right. I mean, I was experiencing reviews by Portland Business Alliance and NAIOP, which are both focused on economic development and focused primarily on the industrial side of the ledger. Right. I realize now that the homebuilders were actually involved to some extent, but really I think what came out of this fall was really a broad-based concern by the business community, by the home builders, by the commercial real estate industry, and the suburban mayors, that way too much effort is being focused on high-density development in Metro's urban growth report, and that the price increases that Metro is projecting for the next 20 years using their current plans would really push Portland to the same rent levels as some of the most expensive places in the United States, places like San Diego, San Francisco, Los Angeles. And if that's true, that's really going to have a big impact on our economic prosperity. Firms right now are at least saying to themselves, well, Portland doesn't quite have the amenities of the Bay Area, but I can move my tech firm location to Portland and a lower cost of housing and a good quality
Better quality of living, lower cost of lower cost of living, better quality of life has been a huge driver we've seen in our market. As we kind of joke around, we've got people moving into Portland just because of that, even without employment, figuring I want to live here, I'm going to come here and I'll find jobs here. But it is also the lowest cost on the West Coast.
And if we lose that advantage, I mean, I think it's going to have pretty dramatic impacts. If I'm an engineer in Silicon Valley and you're telling me we're going to move a branch office in Portland, and then you're going to tell me I'm going to have to pay the same amount of prices as I would in San Francisco, why would I bother? And I think it also has the impact for our children as well. If our children go to Portland State or go to University of Oregon, Oregon State, graduate, and they're just find that just to get started, a starter apartment is so expensive, they're going to think about other alternatives, whether it's Austin, Atlanta, Denver. All those places have good economies, growing opportunities, and a much lower price point for rents, at least if those plans hold true. If
Metro's projections, and what was their timing on Metro's projections on this?
Well, this is all based upon a 20-year time horizon, so 2015 to 2035. They were looking at after inflation rent increases of 37%. That doesn't sound like a lot, but if you factor in some inflation, that basically means a doubling of rents in our region in 20 years. And that would push us to a very high price point. And the reason why it happens is because what Metro is doing is they're communicating with the various jurisdictions about their available land supply and their current zoning. And City of Portland historically has had very generous zoning, particularly along its major avenues like Division, Belmont, Broadway.
Williams, Vancouver.
Exactly.
Yes.
And those places are growing quite rapidly, but to build the 4/1 construction, the 5-story apartment or bigger, you need to reach price points of about $1.70, and then for high-rise, $2 per square foot. And if you're going to be at those price points, that's much higher than the average rent. And right now they're assuming something like about half of the apartments are going to be coming in at these 5-story or higher densities, and that's just a lot of apartments at a very high price point.
On Metro, is there all their growth projections? I mean, nothing's set in stone. Are they putting all the residential, I'm assuming, in the core City of Portland for the most part? These urban, 5/1, 6/1, or even high-rise kind of residential towers. Are they not looking at much residential on the suburban, where the other mayors are saying, "Hey, wait a minute, don't forget about us"?
I think that's right. I think that if you take a look at their 20-year horizon, they're projecting about 60% of the housing is going to be developed multifamily. Historically, we've been about 40% multifamily and about 60% single. And again, the very generous zoning rules in Portland, or zoning laws in Portland, are effectively acting like a sponge and soaking up that existing demand in their models. So in other words, their models are really a population assignment model, and what it looks at is could the housing be accommodated inside the urban growth boundary first, and it doesn't really pay much attention to the economics of whether those developments will make
sense or not. Yes.
So in other words, the model basically says that if you zone for a 10-story building, you'll get a 10-story building. As developers, we know that you can only build a 10-story building if you're going to reach the rents to justify.
Right, and we've seen that out on light rail, some spots in the East County on light rail where you've got very, very generous zoning. It's been that way for 15 years, but the economics aren't there. The cost of construction in one location versus another is not that much different, other than some site costs. But the rent levels aren't there. Doesn't matter what kind of zone you have there. If you can't get those rent levels, you're not going to build it.
We did a study earlier this year looking at newly permitted and built apartments. We took a look at some of the appraisal comps. And the only things that we were seeing that was truly at the at the highest density that you'd need, or the highest price point that you'd need to get a high-rise apartment, in other words, bigger than 5 stories, those are all in the core of Portland, Pearl District, Lloyd District, and then to get 5/1, most of those were close-in neighborhoods, still in Portland. Things that were being built in Hillsborough, in Gresham, Oregon City, those were at price points where the only thing that you could make sense was 2-story,
suburban wood
apartment buildings. And most of those sites are being used up. And so to me, if Metro needs to change the way that they look at land and have housing prices and housing rents factored in as a variable, something that they have and recognize that they have some control over, or at least it should be influencing their decisions in some way.
So from the standpoint, when you did this density at any cost report in November, kind of in response to the preliminary, what's the flexibility for Metro to be able to say, hey, we're going to do this, this is in our plan, but 5 years from now, I know the mechanics to change, it's not that easy. There's the whole zone change, and once they put land in, they don't take it out. It's things like that. I mean, kind of it almost seems like they're basing everything on, the macroeconomics that are happening right now in this, but you've got to really look moving forward.
Well, I think that's right. I think that the number of the planners at Metro have been focused on the immediate impacts of the last 5 years, and in the last 5 years, it's been possible to get financing for multifamily in a way that has not been true for single-family development. And so in some senses it's been a bit of an aberration. I think the other factor that's been out there is that for a lot of young people, they've taken a big hit in terms of their wealth. You know, the 30% decline in prices that we saw, home prices wiped out a lot of people's home equity. A lot of younger people like my students, are saying to themselves, gee, my brother, my sister lost money buying a house. I'm going to be skeptical. I'm going to stay in apartments. On the other hand, surveys that have been done looking at people's preferences indicate that ultimately people do want to become homeowners. And so I think we need to be very careful and very cautious to try to assume that there's been this sea change towards people only living in multifamily apartments. Right. I think we have to have a more balanced planning model and recognize that we need to have subdivisions built as well as apartments built.
We just had somebody talk about that. They did some studies on millennials, and the kind of the question, the underlying theme is, yes, they're getting married later. Yes, they're starting families later. That's not unusual. Every generation has done that historically, so it's just not the millennials. The big question is again, what you brought up, when you do surveys with them, they still want single-family homes. They don't want to live in apartments, so to speak, right now. They do want it more of an urban center. So the question always comes back, is it economics that's driving their decisions, or is it really life choices? And you know, they're coming out of school with more debt. Yeah, the job prospects aren't as great. Their their wages are lower in relation to the cost of living. So is it really, do they want to live in that, or is it more of an economic choice? And that's kind of the...
I mean, the micro apartments that they're building on division, I think, will satisfy some people at certain points in their lifespan. But once you get the wife and the child and the other child, I think that's going to look a little different. And right. I think those folks are going to move out, and they're going to look for something different. And I think we need to be ready for that. For that change in the market. Right. We're seeing not quite double digit, but we're seeing high single digit numbers.
Yeah, in some markets we've seen double digits. Yeah. Yeah, in rent growth in the last year. So it's been, the last 2 years have been explosive rent growth. And we've seen what happens when we see that. You see tenant groups and things like that talking about affordability. I mean, we're now getting a lot of conversations about affordability within the city of Portland, which 5 years ago that wasn't a question. It was, we were so affordable, everybody wanted to come here.
And I think the commercial industry needs to be careful about this, because I think in the longer run, I think there's a specter that you might get activists looking to regulate rents. That happens in other right. states. We have a lot of influx of migrants from California. Many Californian cities have rent regulations. I don't think it's going to happen, but I think that's a risk that's not worth taking, because we know that there's a lot of negative impacts in terms of economic potential, economic opportunity, right. If we try to go that route.
Now, if people want to see a copy of this report, they can find it on the website below here. And
yeah, come to the center's website. Right now, it's the top article in our November issue. Okay. And it's at the top of the page. Okay. Well, great. Well, thank you for coming. It was good
Thanks for your time. And thanks again for joining us on HFO-TV, and we'll see you next time. And feel free to go to the website and also look at the roundtable event that'll be on there as well. Thank you. Good, thank you very much. It was good.
Thanks for watching HFO TV. To learn more about HFO, call or visit our website.